We have an interesting question here from a new subscriber asking what my biggest mistake was as a trader, or what was the one thing that I had to work on the most to improve my overall trading performance. Thanks for the question. I think for me, it will hands down be the psychological aspect of making sure that you are fully at all times accepting the risk that you're taking. And even though it seems like a silly thing, just accept the risk. The thing is, for me, it was a lot more complicated than that, because in theory, I was okay with taking risk on a trade. But in practice, the thought of actually losing a trade and taking the loss on the chin was a really tough nut to crack from a psychological point of view. You see, every time that you take a trade, you obviously take it because you think there is value. For example, you think it's a good spot to buy or sell from because you think the instrument is either expensive or cheap at the current price in terms of the sentiment or the fundamentals. So you're expecting the market to trade in your direction. And you almost assume in your mind sometimes that the trade is a done deal. At least that was something that I did subconsciously. I was so involved in the trade that the thought of being wrong, or the thought of having only a 50-50 chance of winning or losing, it didn't even cross my mind. I just assumed that I will win. And oftentimes that caused me to act out the moment the trade didn't go my way, or the way, that I planned it out in my head. I knew it would work this way, and that caused me so much frustration as a trader. You see, even though I theoretically knew I would have losing trades, I secretly hoped, that I wouldn't have losing trades, if that makes sense. And for that reason, when I got into trades, I had this overconfidence that the trade will just work out. So even though I set my stop and I knew that I was risking on the trade, I didn't actually accept the possibility of even losing that money. So when trades started going against me, instead of being okay with the loss and just taking the loss on the chin, my psychology took such a hit that I, did the classic silly mistakes, like moving my stop loss further away, increase, averaging in on the trade when it went against me, because, I was so sure that I was right. I just couldn't bear the thought of actually losing the trade. And this was often made a lot worse when I was in profit at the start of a trade. So I would take a trade and it would immediately go into profit, right? So let's take the Kiwi US. So I took it at that trend line and it immediately, goes into profit. So you're like, oh, okay, you have that sigh of relief. Okay, you feel like George Soros. You're so clever. I was so clever to trade at this level. I'm immediately a winner. And then, of course, as trading goes, the trade starts to go against you. And the thought of losing not only the trade, but losing the little profit that you had, just as the trade, goes in your favor, the thought of losing that and then maybe even ending up losing the trade altogether, it was just so much for me to bear that I would often just close out trades at break even, or worse, close them out for a small loss or a small win. And then the trade would have ended up being a solid winner. Now, getting over this took me a very long time, and I had to really employ various tactics to really get this under control. So the first thing I did was something, a little bit of soul searching, if you will, finding out what I was really, really willing to risk, finding out whether I'm right or not. Now, again, this sounds silly, okay, but actually, what you're doing when you're trading, when you have a particular bias, you are basically you paying, or you basically betting a certain amount to see whether your bias is correct. You're basically putting a number out there, a number that you're willing to pay to find out whether you were right on your analysis and in your trade. So I had to really sit down and figure out what I was really and realistically comfortable and prepared to risk per trade to find out whether that bias will play out. Now, I made the mistake of just doing what everybody else did. I risked 1 or 2% per trade, and because that was just what everybody else was doing. But when you are trading with larger trading accounts, you soon realize that, listen, 1 and 2% in terms of the dollar value is really not something that you're comfortable with losing. At least it was for me. Now, yes, there are many traders out there that will tell you, don't ever look at the money, never look at the money, just the percentages. That's all that matters. And yes, that's all good and well. But when it comes down to being an actual human being with real emotions, that just didn't cut it for me, unfortunately. For me, the amount mattered. And I only realized that the amount mattered for me later when I analyzed my trading performance. So you really, really, really need to feel comfortable with the money that you can lose. And if you are really, really comfortable with risking 1%, then just commit to that. For me, upon realizing what a difference the money amount made when I increased my account size substantially, I actually dropped down my risk per trade to way less than 1%, until I felt comfortable saying that, okay, I'm comfortable at losing, only comfortable at losing 0.5% per trade at this trading volume. So the second step after that for me involved, again, the psychological side of trading, and that was accepting that the next trade only had a 50% chance of winning. Doesn't matter what my analysis is, it doesn't matter how right I am, it doesn't matter how much conviction I have, it doesn't matter how high of a probability the setup is, from a fundamental and a technical point of view. I only had a coin toss chance of winning the next trade. And again, that sounds simple, but when you spend 13 hours in front of your trading screen trying to find trade ideas, trying to extract value from the market, you can get so attached to the idea that the trade will work. You fall into the trap of placing the trade on a pedestal, if you like, a pedestal of perfection. You just assume that it will work. And the moment you have that surety that you're right, you have a really, really big problem from a psychological point of view. You need to understand that the analysis might be correct, the bias might be correct, the conviction might be high, the probability might be high, and you can still end up losing the trade because the market isn't a robot. The uncertainty in the market is real every single second of every single day. And the moment you are sure that you're right, you're not approaching the market like a professional. Most professional traders has a trade accuracy of less than 50%, which is something that most retail traders don't realize. Most professional traders lose the majority of their trades. And as a retail trader, you shouldn't expect that you're going to be better than the pros. So yeah, for me, the biggest mistake I made as a trader was not accepting the risk. I didn't really accept the idea that the next trade only has a 50% chance of winning. Despite all my efforts, despite all my time, all the energy, all the analysis, all the conviction, all the probability, the next trade doesn't have any increased chances of winning compared to the last one that I took. And that isn't because the analysis doesn't work. It's because the market is rife with uncertainty, and you could be trading for all the right reasons and still be proven wrong because the market isn't a robot. It doesn't move the way that we think it should. It moves the way that it wants. So yeah, for me, it was really just accepting the risk, really, really getting to grips with the risks, and knowing that every trade, had only a 50-50 chance of winning. Doesn't matter the amount of energy and time I put in, the probabilities, it might be a high probability setup, but it doesn't mean that the market's going to trade it that way. So yeah, I think for me, it was just really coming to grips with what it meant to accept the risk of every trade.